The lands of Torridon on the far northwest coast of Scotland have a dramatic environment, dominated by ancient, towering mountains and riven by deep fjord-like sea lochs.
For centuries, people eked out a meagre living here. They fished the seas and harvested the thin soils in the struggle to survive, both against the elements and a succession of ruthless landlords. But there's no doubt about it, this is a harsh environment, but it's also a place of breathtaking beauty.
Lochs are Scotland's gift to the world and are the product of an element that we have in spectacular abundance: water. It's been estimated that there are more than 31,000 lochs in Scotland. They come in all shapes and sizes, from long fjord-like sea lochs, great freshwater lochs of the Central Highlands, to the innumerable lochans that stud the open moors. In this series, I'm on a loch-hopping journey across Scotland, discovering how they shape the character of the people who live close to their shores. For this grand tour, I'm going to places that will literally take my breath away. My journey starts at Loch Torridon, climbs one of Britain's highest and steepest public roads, explores the deep history of Loch Kishon, and wanders along the shores of Loch Carron to Journey's End, near the village of Ploughton. This is Loch Torridon, as wild a place as you'll find anywhere on the west coast. In many respects, living here is like living on an island.
That is the Applecross shore, and until the 1970s there was no road linking the scattered communities along the lochside, and the only way in or out was on foot or by boat, which is how some people still prefer to travel.
Kenny Livingston is a native of these parts and has lived on the shores of Loch Torridon for most of his life.
I was born and brought up at Ardishleg, which is just
along the coast
just
here.
The house that's actually ahead of us at the moment. This white house that's at the head of the bay here.
Was there a road in those days?
There wasn't, no. Everything came by sea in those days. Virtually every house in every community would have had its own boat.
Right.
And
was that like having a family car?
It was, absolutely, just the same. And some people had better models than others.
Right. But was there rowing boat envy?
There was rowing boat, and particularly outboard envy, I think, in latter days.
So who's that? You've got a picture there, is that?
I do, yes.
So
yeah.
You and your brother, you say?
It's my brother Dickie and I, and someone called Johnny MacDonald, who's in the bow. We seem to be rowing him around the bay for some reason.
You seem to be going round in circles.
Yes. Go to church by boat.
By boat?
By boat, yes.
What was that like?
As boys, we used to enjoy seeing other people's boats from other communities.
So it was an event? It was
an event, yes. Tea and biscuits from the minister after the service.
Right. Did you not feel cut off? Did it not feel like a remote part of the world?
It didn't, no. It was just what we knew, I think, and we didn't really feel it was remote at all.
Following the coast and its wooded bays, we eventually reach the village of Shieldaig, a name that comes from the language of the Vikings and means Herring Bay. And herring is part of the reason why the village developed here. For many years, this was an important herring fishery, and boats would leave the loch to go in search of the silver darlings, which provided people here with a decent but hard-won livelihood. Kenny drops me off in the village, where I bump into a present-day fisherman. Richard Frost, known to everyone around here as Frosty, is inspecting some of his prawns, which he keeps fresh in cages under the pier.
So when did you catch these?
Just yesterday afternoon. So.
What kind of market have you got?
The majority of them go to a wholesaler in Dingwall.
What about locally? Do you supply locally as well?
I supply my wife in the cafe as well. She takes some as well.
What kind of price do you get from your wife?
Not
a poor pair, is she?
She's a poor pair, yeah. Not the best price, no, not the best price, but that's just the way it goes, I suppose, isn't it? Yeah.
Are they all kind of graded according to size?
Yeah, these are all in a medium tube, so this is all medium ones, so they're all the same
waiting
size.
To come out. Right, Mr. Langostine, yeah.
And still
So how do you
very,
put him back in there then?
still very alive.
Yeah, very alive.
You don't want to get nipped.
Yeah. They've got some pretty vicious wee claws on them, haven't they, these things? I mean,
They certainly are.
do they nip you? Oh, look at that.
Not if you hold them right. If you hold them like that, then they
Right.
can't, you know. But
Yeah.
if you hold them like that, they'll eventually
They
go
get around and get
yeah,
you.
Yeah.
He's got lots of barbs on his
All
nose,
used as
isn't
well. Yeah, they're all
Yeah.
razor sharp. You'll know about it.
he? I bet you've been nipped a few times, have you?
Aye, fingers like that, yeah.
So I'm going to be going up to the cafe soon. I might see some of those up there on
You
the
probably
plate.
will, I'm sure
Yeah.
you will,
Yeah.
yeah. No.
Interesting to see what price I pay for them. How much your wife paid you. All right.
Yep.
Cheers,
Cheers, thanks a
thanks
lot.
now.
See you later,
Bye.
bye.
Heading around the bay and along Shieldaig's main street, I come to the cafe run by Frosty's wife. The cafe is called Nanny's, and the proprietor, Lynn Frost, is busy serving her husband's freshly landed prawns to hungry tourists.
Prior to me running the cafe here, it was run by a lady called Anne Grant.
Right.
So she ran a little shop on this site from 1950s until 2007.
Is this her?
That's her, yes, that's her there. She was fondly known to locals and visitors alike as Nanny Grant, so that's where the names come from.
What kind of shop was she running? Was it a general store? What could
Yeah,
you buy
exactly,
here?
yes. It was just like a very traditional general store, selling all just groceries and a little bit of fresh fruit and veg, potatoes, firelighters, paraffin, dog food, you know, all the usual.
Right.
So the original Nanny's building was built in 1918, so it
Right.
would have been 100 years old this year. if it had
Amazing,
still
just after
been
the
here.
First World War.
Yes.
What were her clientele like? What people did she serve?
All the people that lived in the village would go to Nanny's, but as well as that, there was no coast road. So Nanny would make up parcels of groceries, and the boat would take them over to all the outlying communities.
And these would be some of the parcels being landed by
That's
boat
right, yes.
to one of the shoreline communities.
Yeah.
But she would have wrapped up all these groceries in these very neatly parcelled together boxes.
I know.
Brown paper and string. It's brilliant. Well, it's a great legacy, and it's great that you've kept the name.
Yeah, it's a great name though, isn't it?
It is Nanny's.
Yeah.
Leaving Lynn and memories of Nanny Grant, I return to the loch with Kenny, heading for the village of Torridon, which lies in the shadow of some of Scotland's most impressive and breathtaking mountains. In many ways, the harshness of this rugged and ancient landscape is reflected in the hardships endured by the people who lived here through the centuries. Life was never easy, even for God-fearing folk.
In previous centuries, when people were just as concerned with heaven, hell and the hereafter, religion was taken very seriously indeed, and religious disputes could have great consequences. So much so that in the 19th century, the established Church of Scotland suddenly split apart in what was thunderously called the Disruption.
The dispute centred on the right of landowners to appoint a minister over the heads of a congregation. Many saw this as compromising their independence.
The issue split the church, and 450 ministers left to set up the Free Church of Scotland.
But they had nowhere to worship because the established church closed its doors on these heretics.
Pushed to the margins, Highlanders came up with an ingenious alternative. Congregations met in the open air. Here in Torridon, the faithful kept their covenant with the Almighty at this amazing natural amphitheatre. And as you can see, seating was on these horizontal stones, arranged in tiers to face this central pillar of rock, known in Gaelic as Craig and Prieston, or in English as the preaching stone. And it would have been from up here that the Gaelic-speaking minister would have addressed his hardy flock. And hardy they had to be because his sermons could be very, very long. And the weather, summer or winter, could be unspeakably harsh.
If these hardships weren't enough, they came on top of the pain inflicted by tyrannical landlords. Local people were cleared from the good land to allow sheep farming. The consequences were destitution and hunger, while the wealthy landlords created deer forests and great sporting estates. But times have changed. This is Torridon House, which was once at the centre of one of the biggest sporting estates. Today, new ownership brings a new vision. Here I meet the current owner, Baron von Ratnitz. Happily, the Baron likes to be known less formally as Felix.
Felix, I can tell that you're not from around here.
Not exactly, no.
Where do you hail from originally then?
I was born and bred in Germany.
Uh-huh.
Lived there most of my life, worked there. But I came to Scotland in '91, and I was captured by the magic, obviously, of the West Coast. And then I met my wonderful wife, which is another long story. But
is that another reason why you're here?
That's definitely a reason I'm here now.
And this is where you chose to live?
I know.
Torridon House?
Yeah, it couldn't be a better place. We're both musicians, you know. We just think this is the appropriate space for creating and composing. We write a lot of music together.
So it's going to be a creative centre?
Definitely. So already is.
I'm not used to being serenaded, especially by such an accomplished musician as Sarah, Felix's other half. Sarah comes from Skye and is a gold medal-winning fiddle player. Sarah and Felix hope that music will be at the heart of their new venture, which will see the old house become a creative arts centre powered by water that cascades through the grounds. This is not just romantically picturesque, it's the key to the future and a surprising vision of the past.
So what have you got in here? This is your big surprise, and it is a surprise. Look at that.
This is the Mama, a 100-year-old micro-hydroelectricity turbine.
This is Victorian technology,
That's
really,
right.
isn't it? Edwardian Victorian technology. And it's still working.
Yeah, it's working really well. And it's heating our house.
Yeah.
And we're getting actually a tariff.
How much can this power?
Well, at the moment she's doing at maximum 15 kilowatts.
Right.
Depending on how much water is in the river.
But it's amazing. This is really back to the future.
It is, and the idea is that we will use the electricity to run a ground source heating system and heat the whole house.
Well, I'm very envious, and I'm really astonished to see such an ancient piece of machinery made in Britain.
That's right.
Still working.
That's right.
And it proves that we used to make stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
That really is
And
fantastic.
it's made by Gilks, and they still come up and maintain it. And they said to me that it's possibly one of the oldest running turbines in Britain.
Well, that must make you feel very proud to be the owner of it.
I know. I know.
And it's great that you brought it back to life.
It's hard to tear myself away from the belts and wheels, the rattle and hum of Felix's generator. But it's time to move on and generate a few revolutions of my own. By bike. The road from Loch Torridon heads south, crossing the Applecross Peninsula to Loch Kishon and Loch Carron. But a turning on the right leads to a notorious mountain pass, the Bealach na Baa, a tortuous single-track road with the steepest and greatest ascent of any road in Britain.
Now that's unusual, look. A road sign with a route description. The road to Applecross, the Bealach na Baa. This road rises to a height of 2,053 feet with gradients of 1 in 5 and hairpin bends. Not advised for learner drivers, very large vehicles or caravans, but I'm guessing it's just fine for a bicycle. Well, I hope so.
In Gaelic, the Bealach na Baa means the pass of the cattle. In the 18th century, there were more than 3,000 head of black cattle grazing the lands on the other side of these mountains. To get them to market, drovers herded them along a high-level track, which today is followed by the road, completed in 1826. But it wasn't tarmacked until the 1960s. For early motorists, its gravel surface would have added to the epic nature of the ascent.
Now, because the Bealach na Bar is the wildest road in Britain, people come from all over the world just to conquer and claim it. And having ticked it off, they go back happy and satisfied, which of course means it's very popular. And in summertime, it can be very busy indeed, making the Bealach na Bar perhaps a little less than wild.
The road ahead climbs relentlessly for 8 kilometres, though I've been told that the effort is rewarded with breathtaking views. But perhaps not today. The weather is looking a little grim.
Oh, these hairpins are awful.
And by the time I reach the upper mountain, I can barely see the road ahead.
Oh, my knees, my knees. Oh, this really is crippling. Oh.
Altogether, my legs have to negotiate 5 hairpin bends before I can relax and take in the much vaunted views.
Oh, dearie me. Well, I'm glad to have got to the summit in one piece, but I have to say, the rewards for all my efforts are a wee bit disappointing. And someone has very kindly erected a viewpoint which tells me that I'm at 2,053 feet above sea level. And the view, as you can see, it's not very glorious at all. But on a clear day, they do tell you that you can see Ardnamurchan Point 50 miles away through the mist in that direction. But I think there's not much point in me hanging around here, freezing myself to death. I'm going to head back down the hill in the hope of finding better weather.
Of course, the best thing about having cycled uphill is the freewheeling ride back down again. All the way to Loch Kishon, where there seems to be no village or obvious centre of population. In fact, Loch Kishon is a pretty undistinguished place, except for its huge and magnificent hole, truly the wonder of the West. This dry dock was created by the effort of thousands of workers who toiled here in the 1970s and was once the centrepiece for probably the biggest and most surprising civil engineering project ever to be undertaken in the Highlands. The construction of the gigantic 600,000-ton Ninian Central Platform, at the time the biggest movable object ever built. I meet up with 2 Kishon veterans, Alfie Edwards and Donnie MacDonald.
So this is where the rig was actually constructed?
This is where the rig was
The first part of it.
Right. So it grew up from this level?
From this level.
Uh-huh. What was your role, Alfie?
We're actually digging the hole.
So you dug this hole?
We dug this hole out, yes.
How many machines were working?
2 main machines, 2 Caterpillar 988s, big machines were going full out, and smaller mechanical diggers, you know, where they were working as well.
A lot of explosives, I guess.
Big explosives, maybe 10, 20 ton of explosives going off in one blast. We're landing halfway across the loch.
Now, Donnie, what were you doing here?
I started here in 1976 on the marine side, when just before the Ninian Central base section floated out of here. So I was skipper on one of the passenger boats.
When it was going at full pelt this year, Donnie, how many men were working here?
Probably the peak was probably somewhere over 4,000 altogether.
That's like a town.
It's a town. It's a town. It's a Dingwall. It's the size of Dingwall.
It's really the size of Dingwall.
It's the size of Dingwall.
They had the police station here, there was a nurse station, there was security, they had a camp, entertainment,
bars,
cinema, bars.
Cinema?
They had 2 or 3 bars, actually. I think it was, the popular one was what they called the welly bar.
Welly bar.
Which you could go in your working gear.
Right.
Wellies,
The other bars, they were more
everything.
like cocktail bars, you'd have to dress
I don't
up.
think cocktail would be, that would be pushing it a bit, but they were a little bit better.
So it must have been a real boom time then.
Certainly was. I mean, brought a lot of people back from, you know, local people who had, most people went away for work, but there was work here for anybody that wanted it.
And it must have been a really exciting moment when this rig finally left the dock.
Massive. When it slowly started moving out, it was just, it felt fantastic. When you look back on it and see what was done here, it would be great to see this being used again. It's a fantastic facility.
Leaving Loch Kishon, I pedal my way south to Loch Carron, following the old route along the loch to the Narrows at Strome, where there was once a regular ferry service.
The history of Strome goes back centuries. Now, because of the Narrows and the ferry, it was once strategically important, which explains why the MacDonalds of Glengarry built the castle here some 600 years ago.
According to local legend, the castle was besieged by the rival clan Mackenzie in the 16th century. Unhappily, the MacDonald's supply of gunpowder was accidentally rendered useless after some women who were drawing water from the well mistakenly poured it into the wrong barrel. The MacDonalds were left with nothing more than a damp squib to defend themselves.
Things got worse when the besieging Mackenzies heard about the soggy gunpowder. Now, realising that they had the upper hand, they were able to force the MacDonalds to surrender. Now, when their castle had been evacuated, they blew it up, presumably with their own supply of dry gunpowder, and the place has been a ruin ever since.
The village of Strome Ferry lies across the Narrows, but without a boat, I'm faced with a 20-kilometre detour around the loch. So it's back in the saddle for me, passing through the village of Loch Carron. On the other side of the loch, the road runs alongside the famous Kyle Line, billed as one of the best railway journeys in the world, and I'm seeing it from a push bike. But at the next station, I get a chance to rest my legs and hop on board a train and enjoy the spectacle for myself. The line hugs the dramatic shoreline of Loch Carron, passing wooded headlands and rocky islands, taking me to the delightfully picturesque village of Plockton. Like Shieldaig, Plockton was developed in the 19th century to exploit the herring fishery. The place thrived because of the railway, which carried fish direct to market in the big cities of the south.
The shoals of herring have long since vanished from the loch, and Plockton today is a village that catches more tourists than fish.
Plockton has many attractions, among them the unexpected sight of palm trees fringing the shore. On a sunny day, you could be forgiven for thinking that you were in the tropics. But although these trees look authentic, technically they're not palm trees at all.
In fact, they're known as cabbage trees, or Cordyline australis, to give them their full Latin name. And they don't come from the Caribbean, but from parts of New Zealand, where the climate can be just as chilly as it is here.
Among the many visitors to have been charmed by the village, and perhaps its palm trees, was J.M. Barrie, author of Peter Pan, who has a surprising and little-known association with Plockton and Loch Carron. To find out more, I'm taking a trip around the bay with skipper Callum Mackenzie. Callum has been entertaining visitors for many years with his famous seal trips.
When I started, first of all, Paul, I wanted to go to take people out to see the oil rig that was built at Kishon in Indian Central.
Right.
But
were they impressed?
No. And then I saw seals on one of the islands at Kishon, so I thought, oh, that's a better idea. So I've been doing that for 38 years.
Good grief.
Yeah.
Callum is so confident that day trippers will have a seal encounter that he runs a money-back guarantee policy if none are seen. But this aroused the suspicion of trading standards when a local rumour about strategically placed plastic seals got out of hand.
That just got bigger and bigger, and the trading standards office heard the story and they decided to send 2 female officers from Fort William to check me out.
Really?
And I found out purely by accident what they were doing.
How did you find out?
Well, there were two girls on the boat and they had local accents, and I said to them, so where are you from? She said, Fort William. I said, oh, you're on holiday? I said, she said, no, we're working. So, what are you working at? We work for the Trading Standards Office. And I laughed and I said, are you checking me out? No.
Checking you out for plastic seals?
Yeah.
Did you ever have plastic seals?
No.
Right. Are you sure?
No.
None of the seals we pass look the least bit artificial as we sail further along the shore, approaching the beautiful wooded island of Ellen na Craig Dhu, known locally as Heron Island, a place Callum believes has a forgotten connection with Peter Pan.
Now, about 30 years ago, there was a passenger on board my boat, and I heard him talking to the other passengers saying, this is the island of the Lost Boys, Never Never Land of Peter Pan. Now, J.M. Barrie used to go for his holidays to the Outer Hebrides, and he would have gone by train, and he would have seen this island, and I believe this is where he got the inspiration for the island of the Lost Boys, Never Never Land of Peter Pan.
Callum shows me a photograph of J.M. Barrie's adopted son, Michael Llewellyn Davis, on whom the author based the character of Peter Pan.
The Lost Boys were based on real people, and after he died, J.M. Barrie commissioned a painting of him in an idyllic Scottish landscape. Right. But it's the background to me that I'm convinced that the island that we're going to could be the island of the Lost Boys.
Well, you think that the background is the view from Heron Island?
Yeah.
Well, I have to say, Callum, I'm a wee bit sceptical about your story.
Well, it could be true.
It could be true.
I've told so many people. I've told so many people over the years that it will be.
Told so many stories, Callum, over the years, and this is a good one.
Well, we'll go and see, will we?
I think we should. We'll test it out. Test out your theory.
Right.
Armed with the photograph, I land on the island to see if it could have been the model for Neverland. Moving beneath the trees with a heron's nest, I go in search of the idyllic view which Callum believes is of the loch and the hills around Plockton.
Just getting to the top of the wee hill on Ellen na Craig Dhu, and this, I think, is the view that Callum was describing to me, which he claims forms the backdrop to this picture of Michael Llewellyn Davis. Now, in the background behind me, you can see the hills of Applecross, shrouded again in mist, and the headland you can maybe just make out over there, and on this picture could well be the entrance to Loch Kishon, and I could be standing on the spot imagined by J.M. Barrie as the perfect place to remember the wee boy who helped to inspire Peter Pan, which would make this the ideal place to end my grand tour from Loch Torridon to Loch Carron.
Heading from Britain's most westerly point, my next grand tour takes me from Ardnamurchan to the Pap of Glencoe.
There's no place like home, and for Billy Connolly, that's Glasgow. Part 2 of Made in Scotland with the Big Yin and those that love him, coming up next tonight on BBC Two.